At 74 years old, I walked into my own ranch house and found two strangers measuring the windows and walls with digital scanners. One of them looked up, smiled politely, and said the words that made my blood run cold. "We're the new owners. Your son said you'd be moved out by Friday. Now tell me something. Can you imagine hearing that, walking into your living room after 50 years only to find that everything you built, everything you loved, had been sold out from under you by your own flesh and blood? My name is Walter Hayes, and I was born and raised in Amarillo, Texas. My hands built everything I own. I started with a single welding machine and a borrowed truck in 1976, working sunrise to midnight, repairing oil rigs and tractors. I built Hayes Machinery Works, a company that still provides mechanical systems across the Southwest. For 50 years, I poured my sweat into iron and steel, and when the time came to slow down, I bought this 200-acre ranch, the dream my late wife Mary and I had shared since our wedding day. She passed 10 years ago, but her rose garden still blooms by the porch every spring. That ranch wasn't just land. It was my memory of her, my legacy, my peace. And yet my only son Daniel decided it was wasted capital. I still remember that afternoon clear as the Texas sky. He walked in wearing a tailored navy suit and Italian shoes that looked like they'd never touched dirt. His watch gleamed brighter than the sunlight bouncing off my kitchen window. "Dad," he said, adjusting his cufflinks, "I have some news. You'll thank me later." Then he slid a white envelope across the table. Inside was a cashier's check for $20,000 and a single sheet of paper titled, "Final Sale Agreement, $2.1 million. I stared at it, unable to speak. The property address, printed in bold type, was my ranch, my home, my wife's garden, the land my father once helped me fence. I looked up at Daniel, and the look on his face wasn't guilt, it was pride. He thought he had saved me from myself. "You can't keep maintaining that place, Dad," he said. "You're almost 75. The taxes alone are draining your accounts. I invested the sale money. You'll have a smaller place in town, no more stress, no more work. A smaller place in town." He made it sound like a kindness, when really it was an eviction wrapped in a business plan. "Daniel," I said, trying to stay calm, "you had no right. That ranch isn't just property, it's home." He laughed. "You transferred the title to me years ago for tax purposes. Remember, I'm the legal owner." And just like that, with one cold sentence, 30 years of trust snapped like a dry twig in my hands. I could smell his cologne as he leaned forward, tapping the check with his manicured finger. $20,000 is more than generous, Dad. Go enjoy yourself somewhere quiet. Think of it as an early inheritance. Early inheritance. That's what he called it. My life's work, my wife's memory, and my dignity all compressed into 2 words. When he walked out, I heard the crunch of gravel under his imported tires, the sound of his new Porsche Cayenne fading down the long dirt road. I stood there in my kitchen, holding that pale blue check like it was an insult written in ink. Through the window, I saw the workers he'd sent already pulling up fence posts, already talking about renovations, already erasing my life like chalk on a sidewalk. I wanted to shout, to call the police, to demand my rights. But I didn't. Instead, I sat at the old oak table, laid the check flat, and thought about everything I'd given that boy college tuition at Texas A&M, 2 business loans, and a lifetime of second chances. I'd always believed money could never come between a father and son. That belief died that afternoon, buried next to the woman who used to tell me, "Walter, don't let pride blind you, but don't let betrayal break you." She was right. I couldn't let this break me. Not yet. Before we go on, tell me in the comments. Where are you watching from tonight? I'm always amazed how far these stories travel, and maybe somewhere out there, another father is listening, someone who knows exactly what it feels like to be betrayed by their own child. Because what happened next would prove one thing: Daniel thought he'd taken everything from me. But in truth, he'd just given me a reason to stand up again. That night, the ranch was quiet, too quiet. The hum of the windmill, the rustle of dry mesquite, everything sounded heavier, older, lonelier. I sat on the porch. Mary and I built the summer before she died. The boards creaked under my boots the same way they had under hers. The envelope with that $20,000 check lay beside me on the old wooden table. It caught the moonlight like a cruel joke. $20,000 for a lifetime of sweat, love, and land. I'll be honest with you. I felt anger crawl up my chest, like fire. My own son. The boy whose first pair of boots I bought when I barely had enough to eat. The man I carried through his first business failure, the one I gave everything for. I wanted to pick up the phone, call my lawyer, call the sheriff, call anyone who would make this right. But my hand wouldn't move. Instead, I found myself reaching for something else, the small, worn Bible that had been sitting by the porch lamp since Mary passed. Its cover was cracked, the pages thin and yellowed from years of her fingers turning them every night. I opened to a page she had underlined decades ago. Proverbs 19:21. Many are the plans in a person's heart, but it is the Lord's purpose that prevails. I read it twice. Then I laughed a tired, broken laugh. Because that was exactly what I had forgotten. I wasn't in charge of justice. God was. So I prayed. Not the kind of prayer that asks for revenge or retribution. I prayed for clarity. Lord, I whispered, don't let me act out of anger. Let me see what you're showing me. Let me do this. Your way, not mine. The air was cold, but I felt warmth settle deep inside my chest, like a hand resting on my shoulder. It wasn't comfort. It was resolve. Maybe this was my test. Maybe God was reminding me that love without truth isn't love at all, and that sometimes to save someone you love, you have to let them fall. I sat there until dawn, painted the sky a faint blue. Coyotes cried in the distance the same way they did the night Mary passed. The world hadn't changed, but I had. By the time the sun broke over the pastures, I wasn't an old man beaten by betrayal anymore. I was a father who'd decided that forgiveness and discipline could walk hand in hand. Daniel thought he'd outsmarted me. He thought the game was over. But that morning, I decided something he'd never expect. I wouldn't fight him with rage. I'd fight him with wisdom. I poured myself a cup of coffee, tucked Mary's Bible under my arm, and walked back inside. The world was about to learn that even an old man with faith can still play chess better than his greedy son ever could. The next morning, I drove into town in my old '89 Ford F-150, the one Daniel always told me to junk. Its paint was faded, the muffler rattled, and the radio only played static after mile marker 9. But that truck had something Daniel never understood. It had honesty. I parked in front of Boone and Carter Law, an old brick building that smelled like dust coffee and paperwork. My attorney, Harold Boone, had been a friend for 40 years. We'd built barns together back when we were just two broke young fathers trying to make something out of nothing. He looked up from his desk when I walked in and said, "Walter, you look like a man about to either bury someone or build something." "Maybe both," I replied. I laid the documents Daniel had left me on his desk, the sale agreement, the check, and the note. Harold put on his glasses, scanned the first page, and let out a slow whistle. "Power of attorney," he muttered. "Dated 2013. "You remember signing this?" I nodded. "Mary was in the hospital back then. Daniel said he needed it to help pay medical bills while I stayed with her." Harold leaned back, eyes narrowing. "This form was never revoked. That means he used it to legally transfer ownership." "Legally?" I asked, my voice shaking. He sighed. "Technically, yes, but ethically, not a chance in hell." For a long moment, we sat in silence. Outside, the flag in front of the courthouse fluttered in the cold spring wind. Finally, Harold said, "You could take him to court. You'd win, no question." But I shook my head. And what would that do? Ruin him? Make me the father who sued his only son, no Harold? "If I go to war, it won't be with lawyers." Harold smiled faintly. "Then you've got something planned." I met his gaze, something smarter. I reached into my coat pocket and slid over another folder, one Daniel didn't know existed. Inside were ownership certificates, LLC filings, and trust papers, all tied to Hayes Industrial Holdings. 3 fully paid manufacturing plants across Texas and New Mexico. Harold's eyebrows shot up. "You told me you sold those years ago." I told Daniel that I said, "Not you." He chuckled. "So the old fox still has teeth." "Harold, I built my business in silence for 50 years. Daniel thinks I'm broke, living off Social Security. But the truth is, I've been preparing for this kind of betrayal since the day I saw how he treated his first failed partner." He flipped through the documents, shaking his head. "So what's the plan? I'm not pressing charges. I'm going to teach him what real consequences feel like, the kind that can't be escaped with a lawyer or a checkbook." Harold folded his hands. "Walter, you're about to make your son a very miserable man." I stood up and straightened my jacket. "No, Harold. I'm about to make him an honest one." That afternoon, I stopped by First Amarillo Bank. I'd known the branch director, Mr. Crawford, since the day I helped him finance his first gas station back in '82. He shook my hand warmly. "Walter Hayes," he said, "it's been a long time. What brings you in?" "Something family-related," I said with a calm smile. "You have a client named Daniel Hayes, my son. I'm concerned about his financial behavior." Crawford's friendly expression shifted to business mode. "I can't share specifics, but I can tell you we've noticed some inconsistencies in his accounts." I nodded. "Let's just say I have reason to believe there's more instability than you realize." He leaned forward slightly. "Should we be reviewing his credit lines?" I looked him straight in the eye. "If I were you, I'd take a good hard look at his collateral sources, starting with the property he used to back his loans." Crawford frowned. "Your ranch I didn't confirm or deny. I trust you'll handle it appropriately." By the time I walked out of that bank, I knew one thing for certain: Daniel's world was about to get very small, very fast. I drove back home through the long stretch of empty road, the kind that makes you think about the years you've already lived, and the few that still remain. Maybe this wasn't just about a father and a son anymore. Maybe it was about something bigger, about showing that integrity doesn't age, and that God still expects us to protect what's rightfully ours. When I pulled into the ranch, I saw Daniel's Porsche parked by the gate. He was on the phone, shouting, pacing. I didn't stop. I just drove past him slow enough for our eyes to meet. He glared at me, angry that I wasn't broken. But I wasn't angry anymore. I was patient. And patience in the hands of a man with experience is the sharpest weapon there is. By Thursday morning, the wind had shifted literally and figuratively. I could smell rain coming from the west and trouble coming for Daniel. You see, people like my son don't believe in consequences until they hit the front page. And that week, the storm finally arrived. At 9:00 a.m., sharp, I got a call from Mr. Crawford at the bank. "Walter," he said carefully, "your son's loan portfolio just went under review. There are discrepancies. I didn't ask for details. I simply thanked him for his time." By noon, Daniel called me. His tone wasn't arrogant this time, it was brittle. "Dad, did you talk to the bank?" "I talked to a lot of people," I replied. "Why do you ask?" "They froze my business account. They're asking for updated financials and collateral proof. I can't access payroll, can't pay my vendors. What's happening?" I leaned back in my chair, let his panic wash over the line. "Maybe, son, God's reminding you that quick money doesn't last long when it's built on lies." He cursed under his breath. "This isn't about God, Dad. It's business." "Exactly," I said softly. "And business always comes with accountability." That afternoon, while the first raindrops began to fall, I sat by the window and watched the thunderclouds roll in. For the first time in weeks, I felt peace. It wasn't revenge that settled over me. It was justice. Quiet, inevitable, divine justice. 2 days later, I heard the next domino fall. A friend in Midland called. "Walter, didn't your boy have investors from Houston used to?" I said. "Why, they just pulled out. Word is he's under financial review. Nobody wants to touch him." By Monday, Daniel's sleek office building, the one with the glass walls and custom espresso bar, was half empty. Employees stopped showing up. His partner Greg resigned via email. Then late that evening, Daniel's wife Lydia arrived at my gate in her silver Lexus, eyes red from crying. "Mr. Hayes," she said, voice trembling, "I thought you should know. Daniel's business is collapsing. He's talking about selling our home." I didn't invite her in. I just nodded politely. "Lydia, I told Daniel once that pride ruins faster than rust. You can't polish it back once it spreads." She looked away, embarrassed. "He's changed, you know. He just doesn't know it yet." She drove off and I watched her taillights disappear into the dark, like a confession swallowed by night. By the end of that week, Daniel was at my door. He wasn't wearing his tailored suit anymore. Just a wrinkled shirt sleeves, rolled up hair undone. He looked like a man who'd finally run out of masks to wear. "Dad," he said quietly, "I need your help." I didn't speak. I just motioned toward the old wooden chair by the fireplace. He sat down, elbows on his knees, head in his hands. "I've lost 3 contracts," he said. "The bank wants full repayment, $200,000 within 30 days. If I don't, they'll seize my assets. I'm finished." He looked up at me, eyes glossy. "I know I hurt you. I know selling the ranch was wrong. But please, I just need a loan. I'll pay you back with interest. Please." I studied him the way a father studies the boy he used to be, the one who once brought me Father's Day cards, made of crayon and paper. That boy was still somewhere in there, buried under years of greed and ego. "No," I said finally. He blinked. "No, that's right. You said I couldn't maintain my own home, remember? You said I was obsolete, just a retired old man living off scraps. Maybe it's time you learn what that feels like." His shoulders sagged. "Dad, please." I raised my hand to stop him. You made your choices, Daniel. Choices have consequences. You sold my land for cash. Now you'll sell your pride for survival. He stood slowly, anger mixing with shame. You're just going to let me fail. I'm not letting you fail, son, I said, my voice steady. I'm letting you learn. He left without another word. Through the window, I watched him drive away, not in his Porsche this time, but in an old Toyota Corolla that looked borrowed. The rain started again, heavier this time, washing the dust off the earth. You know, I once read that God doesn't punish the wicked. He lets them trip over their own lies. And maybe that's true. Because by the end of the month, Daniel's company declared bankruptcy, and the house he and Lydia lived in went up for sale. I didn't rejoice. I didn't gloat. I simply whispered, Lord, let this pain be his turning point, not his ending. If you're still following this far, type 1 in the comments, because the next part is where everything changes. Daniel thought the storm had destroyed him, but he didn't know yet that storms don't just break, they cleanse. By the time autumn rolled into Amarillo, Daniel had lost everything that once made him feel powerful. His company gone. His house sold to cover debt. His friends, the kind who wore Rolexes and talked in investment slang, stopped answering his calls the moment his name stopped meaning profit. You know how quiet it gets when pride finally runs out of breath? That's the silence that hung around Daniel's life. One evening, just before sunset, I heard tires crunching down the gravel driveway. Through the window, I saw a figure step out of a beat-up Ford, Focus, the same color as regret, gray and dull. He walked slow, shoulders slumped, clutching a half-empty duffel bag. It was my son. He looked older than me that night. Eyes, hollow cheeks, sunken jawline tense. The man who once strutted into boardrooms now looked like he'd spent a year sleeping in parking lots. When he reached the porch, he didn't even knock. He just stood there. I opened the door, said nothing. Dad, he whispered, can I come in? He didn't need to ask. I stepped aside. He walked past me like a man entering a church, carefully, reverently, as if afraid to disturb the ghosts of his own making. He stopped in front of the fireplace, staring at the framed photo of his mother Mary holding him as a boy. Her smile still carried the same warmth he'd forgotten how to give. She'd be ashamed of me, he said finally. I didn't answer. Some truths don't need echoing. He rubbed his face with both hands, then spoke again, his voice cracking. Lydia left last week. Said she can't live like this anymore. She's renting a condo in Dallas. I begged her to stay, but she said she's tired of being married to a man who ruins everything he touches. His words hung heavy, like the last nails in a coffin he built himself. Then came the real confession. My friends stopped returning my calls. I tried going to lunch with Greg, my old business partner. He pretended not to see me. And the others, they don't even look at me anymore. He laughed bitterly. I spent half my life chasing people who only liked me when I was winning. I handed him a cup of coffee. His hands trembled as he took it. Dad, he said, staring into the mug, I was wrong. About everything. About the ranch. About you. About what success means. Were you? I asked quietly. He nodded, tears filling his eyes. I thought money made a man free. But the more I had, the less I could sleep. And when it was gone, I realized I'd been in chains the whole time. He looked around the living room, same wooden floors, same old rocking chair, same ticking clock. Everything he'd once called outdated now looked like peace. I thought you were stuck in the past. he whispered. But maybe you were the only one who ever moved forward. I sat across from him. Do you know why I didn't bail you out? He shook his head. Because a man who never feels the cost of his choices never learns their value. You took my home, but what you really stole was your own foundation. For a long moment, we sat in silence, two men separated by years of pride and one long road of regret. The fire crackled softly between us. Finally, he said, Dad, I don't want money. I don't want the ranch. I just don't want to be this person anymore. That's when I saw it, the thing I'd been praying for since the day he betrayed me. Humility. The rain started again outside, gentle this time, as if the sky itself was letting go. I leaned forward, rested my hand on his shoulder, and said, Then stop being him. He looked up at me, eyes red but clear for the first time in years. Tomorrow, I said, I want you to come with me to the factory in town. He frowned. For what to work? I replied. The kind of work that saves a man's soul. He nodded slowly. If you'll have me, I'll do it. And for the first time in a long, long while, I believed him. That night after he went to bed in the guest room, the same one he used as a boy, I stood by the window and whispered a quiet prayer. Lord, thank you for letting him fall only far enough to see the ground. And thank you for giving me the strength to lift him up when he finally looked back. Outside, the ranch was dark, except for the porch light glowing steady through the storm. It wasn't forgiveness yet, but it was a start. I didn't sleep that night. The house was quiet, too quiet for two men carrying that much guilt under one roof. I sat by the fireplace with Mary's old Bible on my lap, the same one she used to read from every Sunday morning before church. The flames flickered against the gold lettering on its cover like it was alive, breathing hope into the dark. When Daniel came into the kitchen at dawn, his eyes were swollen, but there was something new in them, something I hadn't seen since he was a boy, helping me rebuild the barn after a storm. Humility. He sat down across from me. Dad, he said softly, I don't know how to pray anymore. I forgot how. I closed the Bible and smiled. That's all right, son. You don't need the right words. You just need the right heart. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. The only sound was the ticking of the old clock on the wall, steady, patient, forgiving. Finally, Daniel lowered his head. His voice trembled. God, he whispered, I don't deserve forgiveness. Not from you, not from my father. But I want to be different. Please, just show me how. His words hung in the air like smoke, fragile but real. And for the first time in decades, I felt something shift in the room. It wasn't just him asking, it was me too. Asking for strength to forgive without forgetting to teach, without humiliating, to love without enabling, because that's what faith really is. Not weakness, not surrender, but the courage to trust that pain still has a purpose. I reached across the table and rested my hand on his. Son, I said, I prayed for this moment. And I believe God let both of us fall so we'd learn how to stand again, side by side this time. He looked up, tears streaking his face. You still believe he's got a plan for me? I nodded. He always does. But he might make you work for it this time. Daniel let out a shaky laugh, wiping his eyes. Then I'll work, however long it takes. The sunlight started to creep through the kitchen window, painting the table in gold. I swear it felt like the house itself was breathing again. That's when I realized something. My faith hadn't been tested by my son's betrayal. It had been refined by it. All those sleepless nights, All those tears shed in silence, they weren't wasted. They were part of the lesson. Because sometimes God doesn't stop the storm. He just sits with you through it until you're strong enough to walk out into the rain on your own. And that morning, I knew both of us were finally ready to step outside. The next morning, the sky over Amarillo was the color of ash and steel, calm, steady, the kind of sky that doesn't promise comfort, but promises work. Daniel stood on the porch, hands stuffed in his jacket pockets, eyes fixed on the horizon like a man waiting for judgment. He looked different, not clean-cut, not polished, not proud, just human. "Get in the truck," I told him. "We've got someplace to be." He didn't ask where. He just climbed into the passenger seat of my old Ford. That silence between us wasn't cold anymore. It was the quiet that comes before something sacred. We drove 20 miles south past the feed stores and the wind turbines until the skyline filled with the silhouette of Hayes Machinery Plant.
My third and oldest manufacturing site. The steel letters above the gate were faded, but still proud, built by hands, not by greed. When we pulled in, Daniel's eyes widened. He hadn't been there since he was a teenager. "You still own this place?" he asked. "I never stopped," I said. "But that's not what matters. What matters is whether you're willing to earn your way back into it."
We stepped out of the truck. The air smelled of oil metal and sweat, the perfume of honest labor. Inside, the machines thundered like an old choir. Sparks flew from welding arcs, boots echoed on the concrete, and men shouted to each other over the clanging of iron. "This," I said, "is where real men build things that last." I called over Frank Martinez, my plant supervisor, a thick-shouldered man with silver hair and grease on his hands. "Frank, this is my son Daniel. He'll be joining us." Frank wiped his hands on a rag, gave Daniel a long look, and said, "Maintenance crew's short this week. You'll be with Luis and Carl. Tools are in the back. Clock in at 7, clock out at 5. Don't be late." Daniel nodded. "Yes, sir." It caught Frank off guard, that "sir." I saw his eyebrows rise slightly before he turned back to work. I didn't tell the men who Daniel used to be. I didn't tell them about the fancy cars, the failed company, or the ranch. Around here, titles don't mean much, only sweat does. The first day was brutal. By noon, Daniel's shirt was soaked through his hands, blistered from lifting equipment and scrubbing grease from the floor. He fumbled with the power washer, dropped a wrench that clattered across the concrete, and earned a few quiet laughs from the younger workers. But he didn't snap back. He didn't walk away. He just picked up the wrench, tightened his gloves, and kept going. When lunch came, he sat with the crew, not apart from them. Frank offered him a sandwich, and Daniel accepted it with a smile that looked more genuine than any business grin I'd seen in years. I watched from my office window, unseen, as he listened, really listened to their stories. About mortgages, medical bills, their kids' college dreams. Men who worked 12 hours a day and still made time to pray before dinner. That night, he came home covered in oil and dust. He dropped onto the porch chair, breathing hard, and laughed. "I thought I knew what hard work was," he said. "Turns out I just knew what long meetings felt like." I chuckled. Welcome to the real world, son. The days turned into weeks. Daniel's hands hardened, his shoulders straightened, and his eyes started to carry something they hadn't in years: peace. One afternoon, I visited the shop unexpectedly. I found him crouched beside a broken conveyor line, explaining the mechanics to a younger employee with patience I didn't know he had. When the machine roared back to life, the crew cheered and Daniel just smiled, wiping sweat from his brow. Later that evening, Frank came into my office. "Boss," he said, "that kid of yours, he's the first one in, last one out. Doesn't complain, doesn't brag. If he keeps this up, he'll make a fine man yet." When the shift ended, Daniel knocked on my door holding a crumpled time card. "You were right," he said softly. "Work doesn't just build things, it rebuilds people." He hesitated, then added, "Dad, thank you for giving me this chance. I didn't deserve it." I shook my head. "You don't have to deserve grace, son. You just have to respect it." That night, after the men left and the factory lights dimmed, I walked the floor alone, listening to the hum of the machines, the rhythm of redemption echoing off the walls. Sometimes God's miracles don't come as thunder or lightning. Sometimes they come as a man covered in grease and sweat learning how to live right again. 6 months passed, like 6 chapters of a new book, a slower one, steadier, written not in ink, but in calloused hands and long days. Daniel had changed. He didn't just work, he belonged there. He joked with the men, stayed late to help the janitor finish the floors, and even started joining Frank and Luis for Friday night barbecue behind the plant. And me, I watched quietly. Every day, every shift, every choice. Because forgiveness isn't given all at once, it's earned through consistency. One Friday afternoon, as the sun melted behind the factory roof, I called Daniel into my office. He stepped in, wiping grease from his face, smelling of metal and soap, the same smell that once clung to me every night when Mary waited with dinner on the table. "Sit down, son," I said. He did, nervous but calm. "You've done well here," I began. "Frank tells me you've become the crew's go-to man for maintenance problems." He shrugged. "I just try to do my part." I smiled. "That's the thing, Daniel. You're doing more than your part." I stood, walked to the filing cabinet in the corner, and opened the top drawer, the one I hadn't opened in over a year. Inside were 3 thick folders, neatly labeled and sealed. I placed them on the desk between us. "What's this?" he asked. "Your final exam," I said. He frowned, confused. "These," I continued, tapping the folders, "are ownership records for Hayes Industrial Holdings, every plant, every division, every account." He blinked. "I thought you sold those." I shook my head. "That's what I let you believe." He stared at me, speechless. "Daniel, I built this company from the ground up," I said quietly. 3 plants, 200 employees, and assets worth more than $50 million. And I did it in silence, wearing the same boots and the same jacket you used to mock. You thought I was just an old man living off Social Security. But all along, I was building a fortress your greed could never touch. His jaw fell open. "You own all this," I nodded. "Every bolt, every beam." He sank back in his chair, stunned. "Dad." Why didn't you tell me?" "Because you weren't ready to understand. You used to measure success in luxury cars and brand names. I measure it in integrity." He swallowed hard, looking down. "I sold your ranch for $2 million, and you could have bought it back 100 times over." "I did," I said simply, "through a private trust. It's ours again, legally untouchable. The men who bought it never even knew they were selling back to me." His eyes glistened. "You outsmarted me." "No," I said gently. "I educated you." I opened the first folder and slid it toward him. "These documents transfer partial management rights for plant."
The one you've been working in. If you keep proving yourself for the next 2 years, those rights will grow into a full partnership. He stared at the papers, his hands trembling. You're giving me part of the company.
I'm giving you a chance, I corrected. A chance to rebuild, not inherit. You'll earn dividends like every manager. You'll answer to Frank, not me. You'll sign every payroll yourself. You'll remember every worker's name before you sign a single check. That's how a man earns back his name. Daniel's voice cracked. Why would you do this after what I did to you? I leaned back, folded my hands, and looked him straight in the eye. Because God didn't give up on me when I failed him. And I won't give up on my son. For a moment he couldn't speak. His throat worked around the words that wouldn't come. Finally, he stood, crossed the room, and pulled me into a tight, trembling embrace. Dad, thank you. I'll never forget this. I swear I'll make you proud. I patted his back. Don't make me proud, son. Make yourself honest. When he left the office, the evening light caught his face, tired, stained with sweat, but peaceful. The boy who once measured worth in money now understood the value of mercy. I stayed behind, watching through the glass, as he joined the night shift crew, handing out gloves, laughing with the men. He didn't know I was still there, but I saw it, the change, the quiet redemption. You can build machines, you can build companies, but the hardest thing a man will ever build is himself. And Daniel Hayes had finally begun construction. A full year passed after that day in my office, a year that felt both long and sacred. The seasons changed, the men at the plant came and went, but one thing stayed constant: Daniel's work ethic. He never missed a shift, never complained, never asked for special treatment. He showed up before sunrise, clocked in, and worked shoulder to shoulder with men who had once whispered behind his back about the boss's son. Now those same men shared their lunch with him. He didn't dress like a manager. He dressed like a man who earned his keep: jeans worn thin at the knees, boots, scuffed shirt streaked with oil and pride. Every Friday, I'd see him stay late, double-checking equipment logs, helping Frank close up the shop, making sure every man got home safe. That's when I knew the old Daniel, the one obsessed with image and status, was gone. One evening, as the orange sun slid low behind the metal silos, I walked into the plant to find Daniel crouched beneath a hydraulic press, tightening a leaking valve. Careful, I called out. You break that seal, you'll be here all night. He grinned. Wouldn't be the first time. He wiped his hands on a rag and joined me outside where the air smelled like rain and hot steel. For a long moment, we just stood there watching the sunset burn gold across the sky. Frank tells me production's up 20%, I said. Daniel shrugged. That's the crew. They work hard. And the new safety program implemented last week. No accidents since. I nodded. You've done well, son. He looked down, a small, humble smile forming. I've just been trying to earn back what I threw away. I put a hand on his shoulder. Daniel, you can't earn forgiveness. You can only honor it. And you've done that. He turned to me, eyes shining in the fading light. I didn't just learn how to work again, Dad. I learned how to be grateful, to pray, to listen. He paused. I even started going to Sunday service again. Sat in the back row the first few times. Didn't think I belonged there. I smiled. None of us do, son. That's what grace is for. A few weeks later, we drove out to the ranch, the same land he'd sold from under me nearly 2 years earlier. The sky was wide and blue, the fences freshly painted, the pastures alive with cattle again. Daniel walked the property, slowly running his hand along the wooden posts like a man reacquainting himself with a memory. "I still can't believe you bought it back," he said. "I never stopped believing it was ours," I replied. "We stopped by the old barn, the one I'd built with Mary when Daniel was just a boy. The paint was peeling, but the bones were strong." Daniel looked at it for a long moment, then turned to me. "Mind if I fix it up?" he asked. "Do it right this time by hand." I nodded. "It's your project now." Over the next several weekends, Daniel rebuilt that barn from the ground up. He sanded every beam, replaced every nail, repainted the walls, a deep crimson red, Mary's favorite color. When it was done, he hung a small wooden sign above the door that read, "Built again by faith, not by pride." When I saw that, something in my chest gave way. I realized that God had answered my prayer in full, not just to bring my son home, but to rebuild his heart from the inside out. That winter, the plant hosted its annual company dinner, the first in years we held at the ranch instead of a hotel ballroom. We cleared out the barn, set up long tables, string lights, and a barbecue pit out back. Daniel gave a short speech that evening. His voice shook at first, but then it grew strong. "I spent a long time chasing things that don't last," he said, glancing at me. "And when I lost them, I thought my life was over. But it wasn't. It was just beginning, because my father didn't give me money. He gave me mercy." The crowd went quiet. Some of the older men nodded, eyes glistening in the warm barn light. Then Daniel added softly, "I didn't just rebuild a barn this year. I rebuilt who I am." When he finished, the room erupted in applause. But I didn't clap. I just sat there, letting the sound wash over me, watching the boy I once feared was lost forever stand tall among men who now respected him, not for his last name, but for his character. After everyone left, Daniel walked over, still holding the microphone in one hand. "Dad," he said, "I've got one last thing to show you." He handed me a plaque wrapped in brown paper. When I peeled it back, the words took my breath away. "Integrity first, in honor of Walter Hayes, who chose mercy over revenge." I couldn't speak. I just nodded, feeling the tears sting my eyes. "You taught me what a man should be," Daniel said quietly. "Not perfect, just honest. Thank you for loving me enough to let me fall." We stood there in the barn, the wind humming softly through the rafters. Outside, the stars had started to appear, sharp, clear, endless. Sometimes redemption doesn't roar. Sometimes it whispers through the walls of a barn painted red, reminding you that no matter how broken a family becomes, God still rebuilds what's worth keeping. Spring came early that year, the kind that makes the air smell like fresh hay and second chances. The ranch looked alive again, green pastures rolling under a wide blue sky, the barn standing proud in its new coat of red. The letters, "Built again, by faith, not by pride," glowing in the morning light. Daniel pulled up in his old truck, mud on the tires, Bible on the dashboard, coffee in hand. He wasn't the same man who once arrived in a Porsche wearing arrogance like a suit. He was just my son again, humble, grateful, strong. He waved at me from the gate. "Morning, old man, morning, boss," I said, smiling. Because these days, he was both. He'd earned every bit of what he now owned: partnership in the company, the respect of his crew, and most importantly, peace in his own heart. That Sunday, we stood on the porch after service, both holding cups of coffee, watching the wind stir the fields Mary once loved. "You ever think Mom's up there laughing at us?" Daniel asked. I chuckled, probably saying, "About time you two figured it out." He smiled quiet for a long moment. Then he said something that stopped me cold. "Dad, when I lost everything, I thought God was punishing me. But now I see he was saving me from myself." I nodded. "That's how he works, son. He doesn't just tear down, he rebuilds, but only if we let him." We stood there, two men redeemed by grace, the sound of cattle lowing in the distance, the smell of rain in the air. And for the first time in years, I felt it again, the peace that passes all understanding. Later that evening, the whole crew came over for dinner. Frank brought ribs, Luis brought his guitar, and the younger men helped string lights around the barn. Daniel stood up before we ate, cleared his throat, and raised his glass. "To hard work," he said, "to second chances, and to my father who chose mercy when he had every right to choose revenge." The men cheered. I didn't. I just bowed my head and whispered, "Thank you, Lord. You took betrayal and turned it into redemption." As the laughter echoed through the barn, I realized something. This wasn't just my story anymore. It was ours, a story about failure, forgiveness, and the kind of faith that outlasts every storm. I thought about the viewers who might be listening to this now, the fathers who've been betrayed, the sons who've lost their way, the families who've forgotten how to pray together. And if you're one of them, I want you to hear me clear. It's never too late to rebuild. Not your home, not your faith, not your family. Because sometimes the miracle isn't that God stops the storm. It's that He walks with you through the wreckage, helping you find your way home. If this story touched your heart, subscribe to Brian Stories, share it with someone who needs hope, and tell us in the comments where you're watching from. Because every time you share a story of faith and forgiveness, you remind the world that even broken things can shine again. This is Walter Hayes, 75 years old, grateful, unbroken, and living proof that God's justice doesn't end with punishment. It ends with peace. Thank you for listening. And until next time, remember, mercy builds what anger destroys.